We'll yell at them later about that one. Anyway, okay, it's really nice to be here with all of you. I have to admit that
Yaakov Sussman is blowing shofar.
I truly, truly did not think I would ever be here with you guys in this capacity, meaning that when the pandemic first hit, I sort of quickly thought, wow, I wonder what we're going to talk about in Rosh Hashanah this year. And of course, when I thought that, I envisioned being in the sanctuary with all of you, or most of you. I just got a text. I just want to make sure. The rabbi wanting to know. Harris, can you please tell the rabbi the password?
I'm working on it, yep.
Okay. And I really, truly, yeah, like I said, envision standing in the room with all of you, and it is just mind-blowing to be here with you tonight.
Yeah, I wish I could do video.
And that is just amazing. And whatever, we can, moan about it and mourn, and there's plenty of that to do, but nonetheless, the goal of tonight is to try to find a way of finding some meaning within that, or I guess, or unique Rosh Hashanah lesson experience message within that. And, I sort of envisioned, I don't remember exactly how, but when thinking about the pandemic, that the idea, of course, of U'Netaneh Tokef came to mind almost immediately, because we say right in the prayer, Mi yichye u'mi yamut, right? Who will live and who will die? And we say even, mi b'magifa, right? Who will die by plague? And what does it mean to actually be saying that prayer this year out of all years, when we say, like, who, obviously we're in the middle of one. And I think that instead of giving a wandering introduction, I think that maybe what I'll do is, just want to make sure I keep it as organized as possible. So basically what I will say first of all is that, yeah, I'm sitting there with this poem and this prayer that we're saying. And U'Netaneh Tokef, it's one of the most important high holiday prayers. We say it in both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and it's the one that lots of people feel like, oh, I got to make sure I get there for U'Netaneh Tokef. And it's this big prayer. And like I said, we say that God ordains all these things, who will live, who will die, and who in what way. And I sort of was thinking, well, wait a minute, like, we're saying these things, do we really believe it? Now, I have to say that I remember that as a kid, or maybe like a young teenager, being in shul when we got to U'Netaneh Tokef. And those of you who know me know that this is the type of prayer that, frankly, most years it makes me a little uncomfortable, that we're standing there saying it's ordained who will live and who will die. And I remember seeing someone crying. I don't remember who. And I just remember feeling like, oh, people really believe this? Like, people really believe that we're standing here and it's ordained who will live and who will die. And I guess my reaction was sort of like, life is too random in order for us to actually believe that that's something that is in control and that's something that is ordained every year. And I remember that feeling, that foreign feeling of, why would anyone actually believe this? And of course, I think that part of like maturing into adulthood, over the past number of years, I've thought, well, instead of thinking like, I can't believe people actually believe this, rather shift the question to, I wonder why a prayer that says these things has lasted and continue to be the focus of our services for centuria and millennia at this point. And so what I thought we would do tonight is to look at the prayer. We'll look at the content of the prayer, and that's what I've got in a Google Doc. And then we're going to focus on one part specifically. And what I want to do by focusing on that part is really try to take a look at, how has this prayer resonated with different communities over time? And what can we draw out of it possibly for us today? So when we talk about U'Netaneh Tokef, and like I said, I will screen share my source sheet in a minute, and also maybe I'll repeat the link because I know that not everyone got it already. If you came in after I sent it, I don't think you can go back and get the chat. So that's if you want to look at it on your own computer, if it's too hard to see when I screen share it. So a word of background of U'Netaneh Tokef. I know it's kind of difficult to do this given that we're on Zoom and not in person. But if we were in person, I would say, raise your hand if you associate U'Netaneh Tokef with a particular story. Like the story you ever read in the Art Scroll footnotes. Okay, Fira, what is that story? Oh, I can't hear you. What?
Story of a rabbi who was called before the king and asked and forced to justify his Jewish faith, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And the king gave him so many days to convert, or he would face death. And of course, he went home and he prayed on it and thought about it and decided that he was not going to convert. He came to the synagogue, and he went to the king. They tortured him. He was near death. Came to Shul, recite, and then made up this prayer.
Great. Excellent.
Recited. Okay, that's
very
it.
impressive. Yeah. Okay, so that's exactly right. Exactly it. It's a story of Amnon of Mainz, who, right, exactly, and sort of ends up standing before the Aron Kodesh, limbs amputated, on the verge of death, and recites this prayer, right? And that's certainly in the Art Scroll footnotes, and it's also referenced in the Koran footnotes, and that's where my initial associations of it came from. The interesting part, now it's interesting because that story is totally not true, and it's very easy to disprove it, and we'll talk about why in a second. But it's funny because usually when we're disproving legends, it's because we want to say that something happened earlier than it actually happened. And in the case of this prayer, that's actually the opposite. That legend dates to like the early Middle Ages, I believe. And the truth of this prayer is that it actually goes back farther. Now, probably to like the 8th century or so, written in Byzantine times, and in based on the composition and the language and the nature of it, we think in Jerusalem. Now, how do we know that? We know that because a copy of it was found in the Cairo Geniza, which proved that it was actually written much earlier. So I appreciate that. I think that's one of the many unique things about U'Netaneh Tokef, is that it's actually older than our legend tells us that it is. And so, yeah, that means it's what, I don't know, 1,300 years old, something like that, which is pretty incredible that it stayed with us so long. And I think part of the study of it is what has made it stay with us so long. Now, it's a prayer that has many, many layers of biblical references. I listened to an entire shiur that just broke down the biblical references. And it's very sophisticated in its biblical references, and they're not always necessarily so obvious. And so they're really, the act of integrating the psukim from different areas of Tanakh is almost an art unto itself within the poem, within the prayer. I guess I'll call it a prayer instead of a poem. So it's clearly a very sophisticated one, and some people believe it was written by Yanai, the poet who lived at that time. Okay, so that's a word about the prayer itself. Now I'm going to screenshot my screen, and so we'll start to look at it. No, what am I doing? I'm doing the wrong thing. Sorry. Okay. So what I did was, as you can see, I've got a color-coded sheet here. What I did was I divided it up based into the different sections that it is understood to have. Now, I actually found at least 2 different ways of dividing it up. One was into 4 parts and one was into 6 parts. I actually appreciated the 6-part division more. That was by Rabbi David Galinkin of Machon Schachter, who is a semi-distant, very distant relative of mine, and he's got a great piece on it. I followed what Rabbis Gordon Tucker and others have done, just like I said, for simplicity's sake. So it just color-coded it. And so here we go. And like I said, also part of Zoom is that I think it's difficult to call on people to ask, but to read, excuse me. I'm sorry, I'm just getting text messages also from the rabbi who can't get in. Yeah, so instead it'll just be a bit more frontal, but as always, please jump in, just unmute yourself at any point if you have questions. I really, to the extent it's possible on Zoom, I would love for this to be conversational. So the prayer begins, U'Netaneh Tokef Kedushat Hayom. So even how to translate that is a little difficult, but well, let's just go with this translation. I took this copy, the Hebrew and the English from Sefaria. So we lend power to the holiness of this day, for it is tremendous and awe-filled. On it your kingship will be exalted. Your throne will be established in loving kindness, and you will sit on that throne in truth. And then we continue. That was the Teshev Alav Be'emet. And then the next little section continues. Emet ki atahu dayan. It is true that you are the one who judges and reproves, who knows all and bears witness, who inscribes and seals, who reckons and enumerates. Right? In the Hebrew, it's more poetic. The kotev, the chotem, the sofer, umoneh. Right? You get this image that God is doing all of these things. You remember all that is forgotten. You open the book of records, from it all shall be read. In it lies each person's insignia, chotam yad. So please just unmute yourselves and just say, if you had to say, why would someone divide these two little sections, put that into one category? And what is that category? What would you say? What are some of the themes here?
The kingship of God.
Okay, great, excellent. The kingship of God, right? And what else is God? God is our king, and what does God do in the capacity of being our king?
He judges.
Right, judges. And you get that image with the kotev, chotem, sofer, u'moneh, right? That God is it's not just a one-step act, right? It is a thorough act of going through every single thing and assessing us appropriately. And so what tone does this prayer open with? Right, we stand in shul every year and say this. So what 3 times, right? Because Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. What feelings do you get as you're standing there in shul?
God is awesome. Fear and trembling.
Okay, fear and trembling. Great. Is someone else going to speak also?
God is awesome, and we are standing in His presence as
Yeah.
small.
Yeah. Oh yeah, small. Right. Fear, trembling, small. All of that. God is up there. Nothing you can do to hide anything, right? God's going to go through everything of yours.
I think we are in court. He's a judge, jury, and witness.
Judge, jury, and witness all together. Yes. Yes. Yeah. And there's stuff about, well, how can God be all of those things? Dafka, you're not allowed to be those things. But anyway, that's a more technical question in some ways.
Just maybe I'm off, this is Anne, maybe I'm off base, but it doesn't really sound that much like a prayer from the beginning. Like the opening is very unique, I guess you could say. It seems more like sort of an ode to the glory of God, but
But what's the but?
But I don't know, the tone is very different than like what you might expect from like a prayer that ended up in some sort of request or something.
Definitely. It's I never appreciated it until this year when I was really going through it. Like, it is written in a very, let's just say, unique tone, as you're saying, is exactly right. The language is just like a little bit different than you would expect it to be. The tenses are a little bit different, and what it does is those subtleties all work together, I think, to give us a unique feeling from this prayer. So that's the opening, right? We are small, God stands in judging us. And then the second section, Uve shofar gadol yitaka, ukol dmama daka yishama. So with a great shofar it is sounded, and a thin, silent voice shall be heard. And the angels shall be alarmed, and dread and fear shall seize them as they proclaim, behold, the day of judgment on which the hosts of heaven shall be judged. For they too shall not be judged blameless by you. And all creatures shall parade before you as a herd of sheep. As a shepherd herds his flock, directing his sheep to pass under his staff, so do you shall pass. No, that can't be. Okay. Count and record the souls of all living, and decree a limit to each person's days.
Oh my God, I don't know what the heck that was all about. Love you. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to let you take care of that. And record the souls of all living, and decree a limit to each person's days, and inscribe their final judgment. So what if anything changes here, or is contributed to here?
I have the shofar is first of all.
Right. So the shofar sounding, good, great. And what happens when the shofar is sounded?
Well, there's a still small voice, and the angels are seized with dread and fear.
Right. Because every creature is judged on this day, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the point of saying every creature is judged on this day? Like, why not leave it to just people?
So we won't feel more important than anything else?
Yeah. So we won't feel more important. Great. Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
I was thinking it's humility, as she was just saying. You know, it's there's humility that we're not special. You know, God is only concerned about us. God is concerned about everything on this earth.
Totally. You can, right. And I think I guess whether we see that as then lowering other creatures to our level or elevating other creatures to human level, right? Like, do we see that as redeeming other creatures, or do we see that as deprecating ourselves? But yeah, there's a strange universality in this judgment. And I think that, yeah.
The angels are being judged because I thought they didn't have any will, that they carry out messages. They don't have any free will or whatever you would call it.
Here, they're being judged too. But in what sense are they being, in what way are they being judged here? Or like, why are they being judged? What does the prayer allege is the reason that they're being judged?
Maybe, Ruth?
Yeah.
Maybe they're alarmed and dreading because of their feeling about the human being judged.
Mm-hmm.
Not because of them themselves.
Interesting.
I also have a question. What is the thin, silent voice that's being heard?
Okay. So that's a reference to the story of with Eliyahu, right? And the Kol Dmama Daka. It's a biblical reference, but there's been much ink spilt on the question of what is this Kol Dmama Daka? Much ink, yeah. So, but I think
this doesn't sound like a prayer. It sounds like somebody describing what's happening in heaven, and you're standing there and you're trying to imagine what God is going to do.
Yes, exactly. And I think that,
It's kind of amazing that we attach so much importance to that particular section of the prayer.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way.
I mean, maybe it's recognition that there is a God, but that's about it.
Okay, great. And that's such the important question, right? It's like, what is the theology of this prayer, poem, description, right? Narration that has connected so strongly to Jewish communities across the world for, like I said, centuries upon centuries upon centuries. Because yes, as you said, we're not asking God for anything here. We're not saying anything any of us doesn't know already, right? Or that God, as it were, would know already, right? We're just articulating what is actually happening that day. And of course, articulating it in a way when, things are really scary, but they're a lot less scary if everyone else is in the same boat as you are. And that's, I think, also a message here, is that every single creature is being judged. And if every single creature is being judged, in some ways the fear is actually lessened, which then forces us to ask the same question over and over again, which is, what does the author of this prayer actually want us to be feeling when we're saying it?
Maharat, one of the thoughts I had about this paragraph was, or one of these paragraphs, was that God is taking note of every every being. So I don't know, maybe it's not so much that he's judging every raccoon and tiger, but like as it says in Zikronot, like that there's no forgetting before the holy throne. So it's not necessarily like, I don't know, maybe it's for other creatures without the kind of free will that we have. It's trying to remind us that God takes note of everything in the world,
but not in a scary way. It sounds like what you're saying.
Yeah, like it for the the animals, or for the angels, or for the stars, or God. There's a lot of Tehillim that talk about like counting stars, counting sand. That's important to God in some way that humans may not be always cognizant of, and maybe the author is trying to say, well, you're not the only thing under the sky.
So it's God's paperwork in some way, right?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, it says that even the angels are not blameless. And I think there's a difference between judging and being blameless. What the author is saying is that we all have some kind of blame, even the angels. And the emphasis there wasn't to judge you, but to improve and see why you're not blameless and work on that.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yes, absolutely.
I was a little surprised actually to hear you say that there are obscure biblical references in this one, because you want obscure biblical references, look at the Slichot. That's where you find those. This, I think the reason this is so resonating is because it's so straightforward, and we're so used to mumbling davening and not understanding most of it. And this is like, who lives, who dies, everyone gets that.
Yes.
That's very simple.
Yes.
This is why, and I just want to tell a brief story. Before I started davening for South Philadelphia Shtibel last year for Rosh Hashanah, I was going to the same place for the last 40 years. And maybe 25 years ago or something, Kol Nidre night, there was a fire in the community, and a young man died in the fire, for sure.
Oh my God.
Everyone had seen him Kol Nidre night, 15 years old. And the next morning they come to shul, and we're singing Mi Va'esh. It was unbelievable.
What was the feeling?
I mean, just what you would imagine.
Yeah. So that's also, I think that type of experience is what informs how we really understand the next section. Now, this is the section that I want to actually focus more on. And I think it's probably the one that we know the best. Sorry, I'm just scrolling. So I couldn't get it quite all on the same page, but I think probably most of us are pretty familiar with it. So, Rosh Hashanah yikatevun, uveyom tzom kippur yichatemun, right? Now, the liturgy at this point changes. I will not try to sing it. You're welcome. Right, but we sort of go up and introduce a new section, right? So it's not hard to understand a new section to begin here. Kama ya'avrun, ukama yibareun, mi yichya, umi yamut, mi bekitzo, velim lo bekitzo. Honey, I'm teaching right now, but you gotta go ask Bubby, okay? Sorry, Ezra's done this new thing where we tuck him in and 5 minutes later he comes downstairs. Okay, how many shall pass away and how many shall be born? Who shall live? Who shall die? Who in good time? Who by an untimely death? Mi b'mayim, mi ba'esh, as Chaim just said, right? Who by water? Who by fire? That's also the Leonard Cohen song. Who by sword and who by wild beast? Who by famine and who by thirst? Who by earthquake and who by plague? Who by strangulation and who by lapidation? Who shall have rest and who wander? Who shall be at peace and who pursued? Who shall be serene and who tormented? Who shall become impoverished and who wealthy? Who shall be debased and who exalted? Right? And then, of course, then we belt out in a different, song. And actually the other division up that I mentioned divided up, utshuva, utfila, utstaka, mavirin, et roa hagzera. But repentance, prayer, and righteousness avert the severity of the decree. Now we'll spend time talking about what the translation of that means. But I'm curious for either your current reactions or your historical personal reactions to this idea that every year we stand and we say these things. Who by water, who by fire, etc. I just want to know, like, what does this do for you? What is your experience of this? What's your reaction to seeing these words?
Terrifying.
Terrifying. Okay, why terrifying?
Because completely beyond your control, and the bad things that happen is what you think about, and it's terrifying to think about them.
Is it terrifying to think that it's been ordained, or it's just terrifying to think of these things in general?
Both.
Okay, great, excellent. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think. Go ahead.
Thanks. So I never said this before, growing up as a Syrian Jew. So it was extremely alarming to me when I first encountered it. And, it's so jarring. It's so intense. I think in general, it's possible that like the Syrian liturgy or even like the tunes are a little bit more hopeful And this is very, I guess it's not hopeful, it's serious. You're really faced with your mortality, and it does feel like there is a lot riding on the day. We know that there's a lot riding on the day, but it really presents it in very black and white terms in a way that I think I personally am not used to encountering God. That's not how I relate to God generally. I feel like we have a more, a less severe, encounter with God generally. So it's very jarring. And it's when you think about people, personally, I have a parent who struggled with colon cancer for a long time, and to think about him every year, until he finally, passed away, thinking about his own mortality in that way, when you're really, there's something that feels imminent, it's a really intense, really jarring part of the liturgy.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think one of the reasons I also struggle with it is also because I, lost a parent to cancer, and it was just like, really, like, the stuff isn't planned, it's such a, it's very alarming to think that it's planned, and to be coming together and singing this and singing in such a profound way. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Scott, were you going to say something?
I am. And I feel it's a little tone deaf after Devorah's powerful statement, so I apologize for that. But the way that I was looking at this is, you think you hope for the best and prepare for the worst. But this is just prepare for the worst. When, I think when people think about this, and obviously most of it does relate to the ways that one may die, and in an untimely way. But there's also some optimism here. We talk about how God's deciding if we're going to die or not, but God also decides whether we're going to live and if people are going to be born. And that's something that I think is kind of removed typically when we think about this.
That's a beautiful point. Right. And I think that I'm glad you articulated that, because I think I hadn't necessarily thought about that explicitly, but I think that's a very good point for why I don't see this as a doomsday prayer, right? Because there is that element, it's more of a descriptor, like we're saying, right? People die, but they're also born, and this is the way of the world.
Yeah, this is Anne again. Also having lost a parent, very close to the high holidays. I think this paragraph has always felt very kind of harsh and in your face. But my bigger problem is more with the end of it. That has been at least the plain reading of it seems to say do the right things and nothing bad will happen to you. And that just is not, how most people experience life. So, that's always been a big challenge.
Yes, totally. And that's a point I want to focus a lot on. So, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that this paragraph seems to reflect also in Zikronot, where it says who is for the sword, the Zikronot language is a little more general, I think, and more universal. But this feels, or at least the way I've interpreted or read it, it feels more personal. Because when you're I feel like when you're reading the Zikronot, you're talking about nations and broad strokes of the world, and here you're talking about every blade of grass almost.
Yeah.
I think that this section, especially following the last one where God counts and considers each action, there's a sense in both of them that he's not missing anybody. That's noticing each person. Even people who die these horrible deaths don't go uncounted.
Yeah. And I think that's part of, again, what makes it relatable year to year is because we always feel like we're surrounded by tragedy. Sometimes it happens to us, sometimes it happens to someone close to us, and sometimes we feel like we just look at this and think, wow, horrible things happen to people all the time, and thank God that's something like that's never happened to me, right? But it's this, it kind of feels like you're part of the world, right? And that the world is always moving around you, and there's almost something oddly comforting in that in a way. For the sake of time, I just want to we're just going to very quickly look at the last and then come back to this third paragraph, to this third section here. So then how do we finish it up with God here? So then we say, Ki kishimcha ken tehilatecha, For your praise is just as your name. You are slow to anger and quick to be appeased. For you do not desire the death of the condemned, rather that they turn from their path and live, and you wait for them until the day of their death. And if they repent, you receive them immediately. It is true, for you are their creator and you understand their inclination, for they are but flesh and blood, right? Basically, God, but we know that this isn't how you want it. This isn't your ideal system. And that if we appease you, if we, people do the right things, you change your mind. And then the conclusion, Adam yesodo me'afar v'sofo le'afar, right? We come from dust and we return to dust. We labor by our lives for bread. We are like broken shards, like dry grass and like a withered flower, like a passing shadow and a vanishing cloud, like a breeze that passes, like dust that scatters, like a fleeting dream. But you are the King who lives eternal, right? And I think it's once again, it's a humiliating thing, or at least a contextual thing. We're all only here for just like the blink of an eye, right? And only God is there forever. Now, the tone, I think, and as we've been discussing, I really do think that how you see this prayer just it's almost a Rorschach test, right, for each person. Do you see it as comfort that we're all part of a system, that we're all in this together one way or another, even though some of us will succeed and some of us won't, some of us will struggle, some of us won't? Do you see this as being about judgment, as some have said, right? And that we're judged by God and this is the punishment? Do you see this as something that's like really doesn't sit well with you? Or is this something that, yeah, you're okay with? Now, it is very interesting that some pieces I read automatically interpret this section in U'Netaneh Tokef to be about the way that people are judged. And is saying, well, this is the way that God judges, right? God is looking at all of us on the Yamim Noraim, and then based on how we are, inscribing whether we'll live and whether we'll die, whether by famine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that for, I think, many people, including I would venture to say like our community type-minded people, would be very problematic, because do we really believe that? Do we really believe that anyone we know who's ever suffered is because they did something wrong? And actually, this famously, there's who's one person who really spoke out against this? The Ramban. He actually has an entire sermon in the book of Kidvei Ramban, which is a compilation. What? I don't know if I'm supposed to be hearing someone. But the Ramban has a book in his, an essay, a sermon in his book, the Kidvei Ramban, in which he talks specifically, he gave a drash about how this prayer is basically wrong, right? And how this image, this isn't actually the world that we live in. And I read pieces like that also, and I was Googling, it's interesting, there are a lot of pieces, I don't know if it's because Reform rabbis tend to publish more, or because, I don't know why, but I saw a lot of pieces. One piece even said, let's just rewrite this prayer. It's no good, because it teaches us about a world that exists that isn't the world we see, and we're just gonna done with it. Now, clearly I'm not someone who operates like that, and I also just felt in my core like I'm not convinced that that's what this prayer is actually saying. Now, I'm aware that it's 8:25. We said shofar blowing was at 8:30, and also that Zoom can make some people a bit antsy. And so I'm consciously, if we were doing this in person, I would, it would be differently structured, but for the sake of people's sanity, I'm just going to kind of make some points about what I had thought. And then, again, please feel free to jump in. It's just a little bit trickier with Zoom. We'll get there. So what I wanted to talk about tonight is, of course, the time that we're living in. And like I said, once we were in a pandemic, immediately I thought of this part, mi b'magefa, who in a plague. And I thought, well, I don't think that we would think this is about judgment, right? This pandemic, now it has struck some communities worse than others, right? Which is absolutely a reflection of issues like, discrepancies in healthcare, in health and access to resources, absolutely, without question. Who's the essential worker, right? Who doesn't have a choice of what they do? 100,000%. That being said, we have also seen that within any given population, it is somewhat randomized, right? In who it will strike. You could write your own mi da just for COVID alone, right? Who will be a carrier but not exhibit any symptoms? Who will, God forbid, get sick and die? Who will be somewhere in the middle on the spectrum? There's that randomness that I don't think anyone would really actually attribute to the sense of judgment. More the randomness of just a descriptor of, that is how our world is working right now, right? You don't know, like you don't know when you could catch it, where you would catch it from, and what it would do to your body. You just don't know. We've all been living with that sense of fear and uncertainty for the past, I don't even know, 6 months at this point, right? If not longer. Every single person has had this with them. And I think what's been interesting is the different reactions that we've seen, right? Some people will say, well, I'm not going to wear a mask. If I die, I die. And that's just the way it is. And then we've seen other people who, have not left their homes, right, this entire time, and are attempting to control and restrict as much as possible. Now, I mean, obviously one of those is a public safety issue and one is not. So I'm not here to say they're both equally acceptable, but I find it interesting that those are both the spectrums of the human reaction, right? We are living real time, I think, this prayer in a way that none of us could have even thought about it this time last year, right? We are living this sense of randomness, this sense of uncertainty and of unknowable, and of knowing that our own mortality and that of everyone in our lives sort of hangs in the balance right now. As this is coming out of my mouth, I feel like it's horrifically morbid and intense, and I really apologize if this is a lot, but I think it's actually, I think it's good to sort of speak truth to where we are and actually articulate, this is where we've been, right? We haven't known. We've been living this in a very real way. And I think also that when you live it in a very real way, you can look at this and say, and if you see this U'Netaneh Tokef as a whole as being about God's judgment, you could look at this and say, all the more so, this is theologically problematic, and this prayer is a disaster and we can't talk about it. Or if you're willing to look at it as a descriptor, you can say, actually, this prayer is fascinating and really does speak to the human condition, and the human condition, especially in the way that I don't want to assume, all the same uniform experiences here, but let's say on the whole, that we living in the Western world in the 21st century have not had to experience, right? And that we know we have healthcare, we have shots, we have nutrition, right? And so we're sort of, I think, by this pandemic, in some ways thrown back into the world of people who've lived centuries and centuries before us when a lot less of this was knowable. Now, where's the comfort in this? Okay, so I'm saying this, what does that mean? What I want to do is just highlight the last line of U'tshuva, U'tzvila, U'tzdaka, Ma'avirin et Roa Hagzera. And as some of us said, that feels like a very problematic line. We're just gone through who's going to live, who's going to die in a nice way, who's going to die in a horrific way, right? And then it's like, oh, but by the way, if you do tshuva and you daven and you give tzedakah, you're okay. Right? What was the point of putting me through that emotional experience of going through all those different ways of our awareness of our own mortality if you're just going to tell me, oh, I can undo it? And especially if I'm not really going to believe that that's correct. And that's where I think that we have to return to the brilliance of the author of this prayer. Now, U'tshuva, U'tzvila, U'tzdaka, Ma'avirin et Roa Hagzera. Let's look at the second half. Ma'avirin et Roa Hagzera. Ignoring the translation here, or you can say you agree with the translation. How would you translate that?
Avert the evil decree.
Avert the evil decree. Excellent. Okay. Would anyone else translate it differently?
Well, ma'avir means to cause to pass or cause to move.
Okay, right. Cause to pass, cause to move.
Ma'avir is moving in arts, and it never says it takes away the decree.
Right, exactly, right. It's not mevatli, right?
Whatever that means.
Right, totally. The language here is beautifully poetic, and even though we react to it in a certain way, it's very possible that this isn't actually what it is saying. Now, to appreciate what I'm trying to say here, let's look at this Midrash in Breshit Rabbah, because the statement of Tshuva and Tefillah and Tzedakah Ma'avirin et Roa Hagzera, there are parallels to that statement found in the Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, in the Jerusalem Talmud, and then also in this Midrash. And I brought the Midrash because it's most accurate reflection. So we have Rabbi Yudan said in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, Shlosha dvarim mevatlim gzerot ra'ot ve'eluhem tefillah u'tzdaka u'tshuva. 3 things annul the bad decrees. And those are tvila, tzedakah, u'tshuva. Now, what are the two differences between that statement and the statement in U'Netaneh Tokef?
Well, one
Versus
difference is
Ma'avirin and the order.
Right. Interesting. The order. Okay, I didn't actually. Yeah, ma'avirin, and then also the fact that here in the Midrash it's called gzerot ra'ot, bad decrees, whereas in this prayer it flipped it. It's roa hagzera, the badness of the decree, right? The severity of the decree. Now, some of you may have heard this idea before. This is something I've noticed a lot more in like more contemporary writings, is that we try to move away from this notion of judgment, of harsh black and white judgment, and really more into the world of roa hagzera, right? Of the severity of the decree. Now, the beauty of this, I think, is that the author said, okay, we've got texts that are saying cancel the evil decree, and he finesses it. No, it's actually pass over the evilness of the decree or the badness of the decree. And when he does that, he really does flip the meaning. Because now it's saying, actually, when you do tshuva, tvila, and tzedakah, you're averting the pain of this reality, right? The badness of this reality. Okay, so if you're gonna buy that, if you're gonna accept that interpretation, so what is you could still say, so what does that mean exactly? What are you trying to tell me, right? That it averts the badness of the decree. Now, in thinking about how to frame this, I was listening to a podcast with a woman who, as luck would have it, this past year wrote a book on how human beings handle uncertainty. And she focused a lot on epidemics. So she's one of those people who's been training their whole lives for this actual moment. And her name is Margaret Heffernan. And she talks about how what she really sees is the problems of the fact that we currently live in a society in which social media and polls and this and that have led us to believe that they can predict the future, right? Amazon knows what we want to buy. Everything about our lives is predictable. And she says that, human beings, we live in a world that's random, and so we crave that sense of control. But actually, when we go as far as to think that we can know the future, that's first of all very dangerous, but also really kind of paralyzing for humanity and its creativity. But she studies history, communities over time, peoples over time that have confronted huge moments of uncertainty. And she said that the best way to get through those moments is not to say, I'm going to predict the future, but rather to look at the future and say, what are some things that we think we can plan towards to try to improve our future, right? So you're not trying to seize control of it, but it doesn't mean you're also relinquishing control. You're trying to find a strategy that you think will lift you out of that place of uncertainty that you're in now. Now, when I was hearing that, I was just like thinking, okay, this to me translates so interestingly into U'Netaneh Tokef. And this is where I just want to leave us tonight with this intention this year, as we say this prayer in Shul, that what if this section especially is not saying God is ordaining who's going to live and who's going to die. And then we are left for ourselves in our own head to say, really, especially this year, I'm going to say that, I'm going to believe that. Like, my cousin died of the virus, so whoever died, like, I can't possibly accept that that's true. But rather to say, we live in a world in which these crazy things are going on around us all the time. We are constantly confronting the uncertainty of our own futures, of our own lives. Are we going to be one of those people who lives a rich life? Or are we going to be one of those people who dies a tragic death way before our time? And that the prayer then doesn't end with just like leaving us hopeless, just leaving us to sit with that, but rather that the statement, the way that the author of the prayer brilliantly reworked this midrash and the statements in the Gemara was to say, it's not that we actually think that tshuva and tefillah and tzedakah can cancel out the bad that exists, but rather that becomes our coping strategy. Those are the things that we can do to try to influence the world that we live in, to be the best version of that world. Because our other options are to give ourselves this false sense that we can control the world by thinking that actually tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah can cancel that decree when it can't. Or we live with this profound helplessness and hopelessness, and we just surrender ourselves to that uncertainty, which is a very depressive existence. And so I just wanted to offer that as a framing for tonight. And I don't mean this, in a kitschy way, but I think that really what we have seen is the way that humanity in the past 6+ months has gravitated to stories of kindness, of radical kindness, of generosity, the way that we praised, emergency respondents, first respondents, essential workers, everything, people who've put their lives on the line, and even something small like, hey, I'm going to the store, what can I get for you? And I know you can't go out, the way that we network together, I think we've seen that on the whole, humanity has responded in a very positive way. And I think that that's actually really kind of almost a theology of the pandemic in that sense, and at the very least, a way of seeing the world and our world this year through the lens of U'Netaneh Tokef. And I just wanted to conclude with Rabbi Tova Spitzer has a piece online that I found that's just like beautiful. And I just wanted to offer her one of the lines from her Dvar Torah. She's a contemporary. And she said, perhaps the question that U'Netaneh Tokef comes to answer is not why, but how. How do I live my life in the midst of radical uncertainty? How do I stay hopeful in the face of difficulty? When everything seems random, how do I make meaning? And I think that the answer that U'Netaneh Tokef offers is, you do religious things, right? You stay connected with your community. You stay connected with your God and your spirituality. And you stay connected with yourself, right? And try to consistently improve. And that those are the lessons of the ways that we cope with ourselves, with God, and with each other, even in faces of really, truly terrifying and uncertain times. So I hope that that's a kind of intention that we can use to take with us this year, as we will either stand together outdoors or at home or wherever, and when thinking about these words. I know that I believe we're transitioning now to Yaakov. So maybe Yaakov will do his piece, and I'm happy to stay online if anyone wants to ask any questions or chat or what have you. Harris, do you want to introduce Yaakov, or should he just jump in?
A man who needs no introduction.
Amazing. So happy to have Yaakov Sussman with us.
Who can't join us in person, unfortunately, but let me spotlight him so everybody can see him. Ruth, you may have to stop sharing your screen.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah.
And Yaakov, I think, is going to do a song or two and then blow the shofar. So.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to see everyone.
Hi, Yaakov.
Hi, Yaakov.
Oh, good to see you.
Good to see you.
I figured I'll sing a little bit of U'Netaneh Tokef before I blow the shofar. So feel free to sing along. Na 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 Keva karat roed rom mavir tzono tachat shivtom Kein tavir vesispor vesimne vesifkod nefesh kol chai nadalai nai 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 vesach toch kitzva Lechol biryosecha v'sichtov eskezar dinam Birosh Hashana yikasevun Uviyom tzom kippur yechasemun Birosh Hashana yikasevun Uviyom tzom kippur yechasemun U'tshuva U'svila U'tzedaka Ma'avirin et roa hagezera. Okay, do we have somebody wants to call out the kolos? Any volunteers? One second, sweetie. Yeah, blow shofar. I figure I'll do like 30 kolos. That's loud.
Yeah, I love it. Ouch.
That's a big one.
Yeah, look that. Look that big one.
Gosh, I didn't ever realize that the long black one was yours. I thought it was the Shul's. That's very funny.
Well, I actually have my own of all of them. So
Oh.
there's gonna be two of them.
Okay. Well, thank you. I know that one of the many things we'll miss about this year, Yaakov, is having you with us.
Yeah, we'll definitely miss being with you guys.
Yeah. Who is on your lap?
Oh, that's Emuna. She's
Emuna.
up way past her bedtime.
Yeah. Her name is very appropriate for the evening, Emuna.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So God willing, we should all meet next year under much better circumstances.
Oy, amen. Yeah, absolutely.
So, everybody.
Shana Tova, I'm here if anyone had any additional questions or anything. But yeah, I hope to continue to see all of you, talk to you in the next couple of days, and also Yaakov. The details are on our website, but Yaakov will also be doing some singing with us on Friday before Yontif starts. Yeah, Helene.
Yeah, I just want to clarify something you said. It's so inspiring. So I guess what you're saying is, and I felt the same way, that this passage is so enhanced by more scary because of the coronavirus, who shall live and who shall die. But what I hear you saying is, we want to live our lives in the midst of this adversity and do, religious things like stay connected with our community. And, that's what you're talking about, right? And
yeah, I think what the prayer is saying is that, like, to deal with the randomness, there is a way to deal with the randomness of the world, right? And it's to do the tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah, the spiritual, the personal improvement, and the tzedakah, the interacting with others.
It's not going to guarantee that, anything.
Right. It can't. The brilliance is right. It's not going to guarantee. It's not going to cancel it.
Right.
But it's your way of coping with the horror of knowing that this is the world that we live in.
Prayer and, being trying righteous and do good deeds and, repentance, if we've erred, to make amends and to do it, do it afraid, like live through.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah. I think
it's
so.
very inspiring.
Because I think we've seen real hands, like the fear of it can paralyze some people.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm sure we all know, I mean, obviously some people have had to isolate very seriously because of medical conditions, but I've certainly seen also people who I think it's so overwhelming, right? That you just feel like I can't leave my house. I can't do anything, right? And then of course, as we said, on the other end of the spectrum, there are people who are like, well, this is so random. I'm just going to go live my life, right? I'm not going to wear a mask. I'm going to go do things indoors because, like, if it happens, it happens, right? Is that really true? Or is that a defense mechanism for dealing with the pain and the uncertainty of the uncertainty, of the world? I mean, this was inspired because I remember, I was 16 on 9/11. I remember my dad, who's a rabbi, very clearly saying, how on earth do you give a drasha this year, right? Because it was a week before Rosh Hashanah, right? What do you do with prayers like this when you're actually confronted face to face with one of these tragedies on that kind of scale? And I think I see the pandemic as being another expression of that, right? It's obviously different, but in some ways, but it's also that like, oh my God, people are literally dying of the plague right now, right? Like this isn't just a theoretical. And so I think it invites those, you know, those new ways of interpreting it.
But people, you know, and over 60, like I'm way over 60, but people, you know, are encouraged to quarantine. But you know, but we get out and we get outside, or we walk, or we sit in the backyard, whatever we have, you know.
Right. I'm not talking about people following the law. I'm talking about, you know, extremes, for sure, absolutely.
What are you talking about? You said,
and you're still taking good care of yourself, right? You're going outside, you're going to Zoom classes. I think that's like exactly the point, is that you have to find a way to keep going.
And you again, I say it again and again. You Rabbi, you and Shmuel, you and whoever facilitates this, you are doing mega mitzvah by offering us these classes. It is.
I do it. I mean, it's part of your responsibility, right? I mean, this has to happen, right? People have to be able to find a way to stay together.
Wow.
I'm seeing such wonderful comments in the chat. Thank you, everyone, so much for coming. It's so lovely to see all of you. Excuse me. Yeah, if anyone else wants to share anything, ask a question, that's fine. I'm here. Or you can go, whatever you prefer.
Yes,
yeah, Deborah. Oh, who's that? Who's that? Hi. Say hi to the kids for me.
Okay.
It was fun seeing them in August.
I just wanted to offer that the Moda Ani every morning is like the antidote or the bookend for this prayer.
Well, that's a nice idea. You say like, thank you for the fact that I woke up, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's a nice idea. I like that a lot.
So, but that doesn't mean anything's guaranteed. It just means
right.
It's another day, and it's not about you. It's not about me. It's not about oneself. It's bigger than that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a nice, thank you. That's beautiful. Oy, so Yaakov, are you leading anywhere this Yontiv?
Yeah, in Cleveland at the local show we're having.
Indoor or outdoor?
Outdoor.
Outdoor. So do you have to wear a mask while you're leading?
Yeah. I was supposed to switch between, and Tammy's like, no, you're doing all outdoor. So. Both days and Yom Kippur outdoor. So.
Oy vey, oy. It's the mask that's hard, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit harder than that. I convinced them when I lane here I don't have to wear a mask, because they want me to wear a shield. But
interesting.
But for the davening, because I'm standing in the middle, they're like, just please wear a mask. So I'll just figure out a way to deal with it.
That's slacha. That's hard, really. Yeah.
We'll figure it out.
And Tammy's doing okay.
Yeah.
Where is she working right now?
She's in her last year at the fellowship at the clinic. Cleveland
Right.
Clinic.
So she's like seeing patients all the time and all that.
Yeah.
Oy, okay. All right. Well, have a wonderful night, everyone. And Shana Tova. Thank you, everybody, so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. God bless. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank